Hey, it's Rick. Welcome to the channel. So my niece is getting married soon, and she asked me to create her a Zelda-themed ring box. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I did that. I started by drawing a template out on a piece of paper using my drafting machine. I decided this was the best way to get the angles correct. Once I had that done, I cut the pattern out, and then I traced it onto some cheap board I got at the dollar store. This stuff is just 1/4-inch MDF with a thin veneer on each side. Then I cut it out with my miter saw and glued everything together and used brad nails just to reinforce the glue. I cut out the round ends for the lid on my scroll saw and then cleaned them up on my disc sander. For the actual form of the lid itself, I made a series of small slits all the way through everything except one layer of veneer, and that makes it flexible. This is what everything looked like when I clamped it together. It's pretty janky. I used zip ties and stuff, but it was really the only way to hold it while the wood glue set. This is what the base of the box looked like when I was done. There was a few spots where I screwed up the brad nails and they went through and chipped out the wood, but here's the lid. I also reinforced this with more epoxy and some hot glue into the slits inside. This is what I'm going to put on the inside. So as a ring box, I want the rings to sit on the two largest crystals. So I printed this in some red transparent resin I had here. I haven't opened this. It's actually about 2 years expired, and it's still good. So if you've got old resin, know that I don't think it goes bad. I covered the wood itself with thin layers of Apoxie Sculpt and then used this ball stylus to create a really cartoonish wood pattern in it. I just created long, stringy worms of the Apoxie Sculpt and pressed them flat to create the metal banding around the wood. I pressed some Apoxie Sculpt flat and cut out the shape of the lock so I could apply it to the face. This is what it looks like with one side done. I'll just complete this process all the way around. Once I'm done with that, I decided to put some peel and stick felt on the inside just to clean up that area. I wasn't really sure what to do with it. I applied a thin layer of Apoxie Sculpt to the curved lid, and I'm just rolling it flat here. It's a little bit lumpy. I really need to get one of those pasta roller things that you can flatten out clays and stuff with. I found this old piece of acrylic sheet in my collection and stash drawer of stuff, and I decided to use that just to clean up the inside of the lid and hide all those cuts and all that glue. I'll give it a coat first with some black spray paint, just in case there's any areas showing through. I also cut inside pieces of felt for the ends of this so I can glue them in. Now, I'm not sure why I hot glued it in here. It is peel and stick. I guess I had a brain fart. I'm making a button here. The actual crystals that I've printed has a hole into it, so I'm going to epoxy this separate printed crystal onto the button. This is how I'm going to turn on the light package that's inside of the box. You can see the button in action here. Then I'll scuff up the underside of the print so the epoxy sticks and epoxy the button in place. This is a test of the actual LEDs and what they're going to do. It's run with an Arduino. There's just 6 LEDs, and they use the fade and random functions to create this sort of pulsing effect. The actual top lid of the treasure chest itself needs to have another layer of epoxy attached. It's just wood at this point, and it's not smooth enough for paint to really stick to. When all this is done, I put masking tape on the inside of the box to protect that, and then I hit the outside with this automotive primer. It's a rapid build primer. I'm hoping it creates a good bond to the actual Apoxie Sculpt, because I don't think acrylic is going to stick very well to this. You'll notice there's little rivets now on the base that weren't there before. What happened, and here's me doing it on the lid, I created these again out of Apoxie Sculpt, little balls, cut them in half, and then once they cured, I used some 5-minute epoxy to just glue them in place. This is the actual box and lid. It's got hinges onto it. I stole those from a jewelry box I bought from the dollar store. It was the only good way I could think of to get some cheap hinges. I did put a magnet in the front and hit it down into the top side. 2 magnets actually, one in the base, one in the lid, so that when you close the lid, it doesn't just flop around and there's no need for a clasp or anything. I also drilled the keyhole all the way through, so hopefully the lights from the inside will be visible from the outside. I had thought about doing something where the lid would light up or the logo on the top would light up or something, but that gets really complicated. You've got to run a separate wire then to the lid, and it's possible for that to be accidentally pulled out and wrecked. You got to think about how people are going to handle this when you pass it off to somebody. So the actual brown that I put on here, the acrylic brown, took about 5 or 6 coats to get that pretty solid. I wasn't sure what I was going to do for the metalwork. I thought maybe brass at one point, but I ended up deciding on black for this. I go around the edges between the wood and the metal with an airbrush just to sort of fade the wood out to dark. It kind of makes it look older and more rotten. Then I dry brushed over all the wood just to raise the textures. What I'm doing here with the metal, I've got a little piece of sponge glued to a toothpick, and I'm just dabbing some lighter color gray and then smudging it around with a damp Q-tip. I'm hoping this is going to give the metal a little bit of a textured effect. I also edge highlight everything and paint the rivets themselves with a little bit of a lighter gray. I go in over the wood with a couple of transparent black acrylic washes. I do some more edge lighting with an even lighter color gray, just to pick things up a bit. I learned most of these techniques from watching YouTubers. I used my Silhouette vinyl cutter and some stencil vinyl to cut out the logo for the lid, and here I'm spraying it with black. I was pretty happy when I peeled up the stencil vinyl and it didn't pull any paint off. I've had problems with that in the past. This stuff is pretty low tack though. I'm not really sure if I like the black logo, and I do end up changing that later. I cut a few pieces of that black felt again just for the lid. My thoughts are that when the lid closes, the acrylic might actually stick to itself and start peeling the paint off around that edge, so putting this fabric protector at least around a little bit of it sort of keeps the two separate pieces apart a bit, just a couple of millimeters. Here I'm pulling up the protective plastic on the inside acrylic sheet. Now I'm going to paint the rest of the inside lid black. So my niece wanted this put on the inside as a sort of a personalization, so I cut it out of my vinyl cutter, used some transfer tape to stick it onto some silicone parchment paper, and I'll use that to locate the position inside of the lid. Tack it down with one side of the transfer tape, peel off the parchment paper, and now you can just push everything down, rub it all in place, and it should be centered. This is a font I got off the internet. So yeah, you can see that black logo on top there doesn't stand out very well, so I think I'm going to use this copper Liquitex acrylic ink. I put the logo back over top carefully of where it was, and you can see this is much better now. It was either this or gold, but I thought the copper would look better. I've got to cut a circuit board to put everything onto, the arduino, the LEDs, the resistors and stuff. Now I printed this little pink insert. This is an FDM print. This is going to hold the whole package together. I decided to drill a couple of holes underneath to put the LEDs directly into 2 of the crystals, just to make them the brightest part, and then I epoxied them in place. Here's a test run. You can see the 4 LEDs on the circuit board along with the Arduino, and the 2 crystals, or the 2 LEDs inside of the crystals on the printed piece. I'm running this off of 3 AA batteries. The battery holder itself will get glued and screwed on the underside of this little insert. That's sort of the whole point. The whole insert can be taken out in one piece, and then the battery's replaced and then put back into the box, so nobody has to fidget with wires or disconnecting stuff. Here's a test run. You push the button, and in about a second and a half or so, all the LEDs start working. The Arduino's not really an instant on kind of thing. I decided to mask off and paint all of this just so that no pink shows through if it's not put into the box fully or there's any weird edges or anything. And here's the final product. Turned out pretty good. I did hit it with a few coats of a matte varnish over top of everything. I'm hoping it's not going to scratch off too easily. And here's what happens when you push the button. I think it looks pretty cool. This is it in a darker environment just so you can see how the crystals work. It actually looks better in person. These things never show up well on camera. Anyway, that's it. I hope this has inspired you to go out and make something. Don't forget to hit all the buttons on the way out, and thanks for watching.